All right, well, I showed you some admittedly quite advanced looking particle systems. Get the share screen going here. So I want to talk about the Shuriken particle system. There's a nice tutorial from Unity Learn down here that you can look at. Particle systems, as we saw, make clouds of smoke, steam, fire, explosions, all kinds of stuff. We're going to talk about the curve editor, colors and gradients, the gradient editor, the particle system inspector, the various modules that we use to manage our particle systems, and ultimately particle effects. I was interested in the idea in the name Shuriken. It's a Japanese word meaning sword hidden in the hand. And I think our Western association of Shuriken is with the throwing stars or ninja stars. So it's just an aside, an interesting thing. So the Shuriken system is clearly an example of a TMO, too many options. And defining a particle system, there are 24 different base properties that we have to define. Generally, most of the defaults work. There are 22 different modules that we use to modify the behavior of the particles as time progresses. These modules have between 1 and 24 different options that have to be defined. This is 148 different options. So with this complexity comes great power. A couple of the tools that we will use with our particle system. One is the curve editor. We saw the curve editor with the animation system, and the curves that we're using in here are similar. A lot of the properties in the modules describe how a property changes with time. For these, we'll use these min-max curves. The time animated property, for example, size or speed, with pull-down menus where we can choose among different choices. The simplest is the constant. We put in a number to a little box, and that's the property that doesn't change with time. Alternatively, we can specify a curve that will define how that property changes with time in the curve editor. Here's an example of one. This is kind of the maximum value that we can set. The minimum value is 0. And over the time of our particle's life, this property, whatever it is, will go down to 0 and then come back up to 5 again. There are a number of predefined little defaults that we get to specify here if we want to. As part of its power, we also have the ability to choose random between constants. So in this case, we would essentially be setting, say, a minimum value and a maximum value, and it would choose a random value in that range. A really cool tool is the random between curves. We can generate 2 different curves, and it will generate a curve that's in between the min and the max curve, and the property will change in time based on that generated curve. And this will apply to each individual particle, so we can have lots of different strange behavior propagating through our system. So in the curve editor, the x-axis is time between 0 when the particle system starts and the value specified by the duration property. I'll show you that in a little while. And the y-axis, of course, is the value of the animated property. We can adjust the range there in that little box right here. We can adjust the range there. The curve editor displays all of the curves for a particular particle system in a particular window. So here's what an inspector might look like for a particle system. We have the various modules. We have some curves here for a vector property. And down here in this gray area that you can, I'm sure, barely see is where those three velocity curves will show. You can remove them by selecting the remove button, and you can optimize a curve by pressing the optimize button, in which case the curve will be replaced by a curve defined by at most 3 keys. And to me, that means we're talking about a parabola. So we also have these, if we have a vector property, something like velocity that has X, Y, and Z components, if we ask for curves, we'll get a triple min-max curve where we have curves individually for each of the X, Y, and Z components of that velocity over lifetime. When we have a lot of curves in the curve editor, we can toggle them on and off. We can also detach the curve editor from the inspector and then dock it wherever we want it in our editor layout. Now, the other tool that we'll use is the color tool and the gradients. Gradients look like this. They start off at some white value, they get red, and then they progress on to white, becoming more and more transparent. And so this color over lifetime, the color would vary between these two. We have 2 gradients here, and so we're going to randomly between two gradients. So with color-based properties, we'll have the same kind of pull-down menu where we can choose a color. We get to pick a specific color from the color picker wheel. Let me start a particle over here, particle system. This is an effect. Here's the particle system. And here's a color that I'll choose from the color picker wheel. We have a couple of different choices. We can either do this in RGB that goes from 0 to 255, RGB that goes from 0 to 1, or hue saturation value, where we get to pick a color off this rainbow chart and a saturation, how fully colored it is, and a value, which is sometimes called luminance, sometimes called lighting, but it's sort of, if we slide all this way, it becomes gray. There's also an alpha channel here. Alpha is opacity. So that would be our color picker. Now, a gradient, on the other hand, varies through time. We have the choice of random between 2 colors. So the color varies with time and is chosen at random between 2 specified colors. And we have random between 2 gradients, where we specify 2 gradients and it will choose a pathway that is randomly between those 2. There's also a last one, random color, where we still provide a gradient, but in this case, the horizontal axis is no longer time, but instead is the space from which that random color is chosen. We have a lot of control here with the gradients. Now, a gradient looks like this. The gradient editor looks like this. Along the bottom are key frames that we specify at which we define a color, so an RGB value. So with one of these little tabs, we would click on it, a color wheel would appear, and we'd pick a particular color, and we'd move to the next tab, pick another color, and the next tab, pick another color. On the top here is the alpha value, the opacity. So what we have here is something that's starting off opaque, becoming more transparent, and becoming very transparent here at the end. You can add as many of these markers as you want just by clicking along the top or bottom and selecting the colors or opacities. Um, you can drag them around and you can set their values in little windows as well, rather than using the sliders. If you want to get rid of a marker, you can just drag it off screen and it goes away. So the particle system inspector looks something like this. We've got it's a component just like our transform. It has this kind of base or main module that has the name of the object on which it resides, various properties about how the particles start, and then the various modules that define how it behaves with time. These particle systems can be grouped together into something we call particle effects. These things will more or less automatically child themselves to the beginning particle system, and they then become kind of one object, and they can all be edited at once with the particle effect editor. It shows all the different particle systems all in one kind of menu system. I'm going to talk a lot about the modules. As I mentioned, there are 22 of them. So a lot of time we'll spend on the modules. And these are the things that give us the power to do fancy things with our particle systems. The modules they can appear like this, where we have 3 modules, and that's all we're seeing. Or you can select to add to that list various particles by pulling down the little square here. So here I've got, well, actually, here I have them all show all modules. And so now I see all the modules, only the checkmarked ones are active: emission, shape, and render. All particle systems start off with an emission, shape, and render. But you can also set this to not show all modules. And now we only see the ones that are active. And if we want to add one, say force over lifetime, I have to explicitly add it there. It comes up automatically checked, and I can then do stuff with that module. Which way you do this is, of course, up to you. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the properties are controllable by curves, and any color properties that we have are controlled either by specifying a particular color or by defining one of these gradients that defines the color. The main module is kind of defines how the particle system starts. This module is always present. It can't be removed or disabled. And you remember I mentioned the duration back when I was talking about the time axis of our curves and gradients. This is the duration shown here at the top of the main module, 5 seconds. I'm not showing you all of them, but the important ones, the duration, the length of time the system runs, looping. If this check mark is enabled, the system will begin again at the end of its duration and repeat endlessly. If looping is set, we can check the pre-warm, in which case it will begin as though it had already completed a full cycle. So rather than the particles sort of filling the scene the way this one is doing, let me restart this. This is now filling the scene. If instead I have the pre-warm set here and I restart it, it starts with the particle system already full of particles as though it had run one cycle. There's a start delay, how long after the system starts before it begins emitting. We have the lifetime of the particles, how long they last. We have their start speed, we have their start size, we have their start rotation, and we have their start colors. All of these things can be overridden later with the time-dependent modules that we'll add. There's a gravity modifier, which scales how much the gravity affects our particles. Right now, the gravity moderator is 0. Where is it? Let's see, gravity. So if I make this 0.25, my particles now behave more like a fountain, shooting up in the air and falling with a quarter the acceleration of gravity. Size is 1. If I set this to 2, the particles are bigger. Start speed is 5. If I set that to 10, they get a bigger boost up. And the lifetime is how long the particles last. If I set it to 1, the particles don't last very long. And of course, start color, I can make them red. So all of these properties are settable. And here's the choice of a gradient where we can now set a gradient. I'll start off with a blue color. Start off with a blue color, and I'll start off with a blue color, and I'll end with a red color. And so my particles now, over the 5-second duration, start off blue and then later they turn to red. Notice this is in the time of this duration, in the 5 seconds that the particles are living, not over their lifetime. There also are these presets where we can select different gradients that we've already defined, and if we find one that we like, we can assign it with a new one and add a new preset. So all of this gets saved. Here's the alpha value. Alpha here for this value is 0. Well, this goes 0 to 255, so 0 is completely transparent. This one is completely opaque, and these are somewhere in between. And here's the location where we can move these around or specify them at a particular value. The simulation space is either in the parent object's local space, in which case the particles will stick with the object if it's moving, as opposed to world space, in which case if the object is moving, they'll be left behind. And there's a third option that you can put them in the space of a custom object, not necessarily the particle systems object. There's a speed that lets you adjust how rapidly the system plays, and there's a play on awake so that the particle system will play when it comes into existence. With this unchecked, you can then turn on the particle system later with scripting. One important one is the maximum number of particles. By default, this is set to 1,000. If I set this down to 10, you'll see that we run out of particles periodically and it stops emitting them. And this, of course, can be quite large, and we can make many, many particles, and the system all works quite well. This little window over here shows you how many particles there are in the system. So let me restart that. So this is telling me how many particles there are in the system. And I've run out of particles here because my rate is just way too high, set it at 1,000. So we end up with 1,000 particles, although we could have up to 10,000. So I'm going to stop there. Next lecture, I'll talk about the various modules, the emission, shape, velocity, force, color, size, rotation, external forces, noise, collision triggers, subemitters, texture sheet animation, lights, trails, and the renderer. But I'm going to do that in the next lecture. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop the sharing, and I'm going to end the recording, and I'll see you all in class. Bye.